Sam had only lived in the neighborhood for a few months, but he already felt proud of the little home he had bought. It wasn't the biggest house on the street, but it was his, and that meant everything. He had worked for years to save enough to move into this quiet community. The tall trees, the neatly cut lawns, and the calm streets made it feel like a safe place to start fresh. That Saturday afternoon, Sam decided to decorate his backyard. He set up a few string lights along the wooden fence, placed folding chairs around the table, and even brought out a small speaker for soft music. He had invited 2 close friends for dinner later in the evening. It wasn't anything grand, just a simple gathering with food, laughter, and good company. As Sam adjusted the lights, he thought about how peaceful life had been so far. Most of the neighbors had waved when they saw him, though he hadn't spoken much with them yet. He knew there was a homeowners association something about keeping everything tidy and organized, but he hadn't paid much attention to it. After all, he paid his fees on time and followed the rules he knew. The air was calm, and the smell of fresh grass made him smile. He was placing plates on the table when suddenly, a sharp, quick knock echoed at his front door. It wasn't the kind of gentle knock a friend would make. It was loud, like someone wanted to be noticed right away. Sam wiped his hands on his jeans and walked to the door. When he opened it, he found a woman standing there. She looked to be in her 50s, dressed in a crisp blazer even though it was warm outside. In her hand, she carried a clipboard with several papers clipped neatly on it. Her expression was stern, and she didn't smile. "Good afternoon," she said, though her voice carried more authority than warmth. "I'm Linda, the president of the Homeowners Association." Sam nodded politely. "Hello. How can I help you?" Linda wasted no time. "You'll need to clear your backyard this evening," she said, tapping the clipboard with her pen. "I'm hosting a garden party for my guests, and your setup is going to disturb the view from my house." For a moment, Sam thought he had misheard her. He blinked, unsure how to respond. "I'm sorry," he asked, his tone gentle. Linda lifted her chin slightly. "I need your yard empty. The lights, the chairs, everything. My guests will be sitting on my deck, and your arrangement will ruin the look. So I'll need you to take it all down." Sam's heart skipped a beat. He looked back toward his yard through the open door. His small decorations hardly seemed like a problem. They were neat, simple, and only for his friends. Turning back to Linda, he said carefully, "I'm having a few friends over tonight. It's nothing big, just dinner. I don't think my backyard should be an issue." Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. "This neighborhood is run by the association, and I am its president," she replied. "When I say something is inappropriate, it needs to be corrected. I expect you to cooperate." Her words hung heavy in the air. Sam felt a mix of surprise and confusion. He had never met someone who spoke with such certainty, especially about something so personal. He didn't want to argue, but the request sounded unreasonable. He tried again, keeping his voice calm. "I understand the association has rules. But this is my yard. I'm not making noise, I'm not blocking anyone's view, and I'm not breaking any rule that I know of. I really don't think it's fair to ask me to cancel my evening." Linda's eyes narrowed. She tapped her pen against the clipboard again, the sharp clicks echoing in the silence. "It's not about fairness. It's about respect for the community. My guests are important, and they deserve a perfect evening. Your little lights and chairs may seem small to you, but they will distract from the beauty of the event." Sam's stomach tightened. He had imagined a quiet evening with laughter and food, not a tense conversation at his doorstep. Still, he tried not to show his frustration. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "but I can't cancel my plans. My friends are already on their way." For the first time, Linda's voice grew louder. "This isn't a request," she said firmly. "I expect you to clear your yard before my party begins." Sam glanced down the street. A few neighbors were walking their dogs or tending to their gardens, but he wondered if they could hear the exchange. He didn't want to cause a scene, yet Linda's tone was already drawing attention. As she stood there, waiting for his response, Sam felt a wave of unease. He had moved into this neighborhood for peace, for a fresh start, and yet here he was standing at his own front door, being told to leave his backyard empty for someone else's guests. Something told him this was only the beginning. Sam closed the door softly after Linda left, but her words still echoed in his mind. He walked back to the backyard, staring at the string lights that hung gently across the fence. The chairs were neatly arranged, the table set with care, and the evening sun painted the sky with a soft glow. Everything looked peaceful, yet his thoughts were far from calm. Why would someone demand that he clear his yard just for her guests? It made no sense to him. He tried to shake it off and focus on preparing for his friends. He told himself maybe Linda was just having a stressful day and that she wouldn't bother him again. But Sam was wrong. Barely half an hour later, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was even louder. Sam hesitated for a moment, then walked over. When he opened the door, Linda was back, her clipboard tucked tightly under her arm, her expression more serious than before. "I don't see any changes in your yard," she said immediately, not even offering a greeting. "Did you not hear what I told you earlier?" Sam kept his voice calm. "I heard you, but as I explained, I have my own plans tonight. I can't take everything down. My friends will be here soon." Linda's eyes widened slightly, as if she couldn't believe he was refusing her request. She stepped closer, lowering her voice but making it sharper. "You are new here, and perhaps you don't understand how things work. I am responsible for this neighborhood. When I say something, people usually listen. That is why the community is as beautiful as it is." Sam folded his arms lightly across his chest. "I respect the community. I moved here because I liked how peaceful it seemed. But I also believe I should be able to enjoy my own yard, especially when I'm not breaking any rules." Linda shook her head firmly. "It is not about rules. It is about presentation. My guests are special, and they will be sitting on my deck. From where they sit, your backyard will be in their view. Do you want them to see folding chairs and cheap lights?" The words stung a little, though Sam tried not to show it. He had bought those lights carefully, choosing something simple but warm. The chairs may not have been expensive, but they were his, and he had arranged them with care. To him, they represented comfort and friendship, not clutter. Taking a deep breath, Sam replied, "I'm sorry you feel that way, but my backyard isn't part of your event. I'm just spending time with my friends. I don't think it's fair to ask me to move everything for your party." Linda's face grew redder. She tapped her foot impatiently, then said, "If you refuse, you are making things very difficult for me. Do you want the whole neighborhood to see you as uncooperative?" Sam almost laughed at the suggestion, though he held it back. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was being painted as the problem. The unfairness of it made his chest tighten, but he remained calm. "I think the neighborhood will understand I'm just using my own yard." For a moment, There was silence between them. Only the sound of birds in the distance filled the air. Then Linda took a bold step forward, moving off the sidewalk and onto Sam's front lawn. She looked past him, toward the backyard, as though she were inspecting it. "This won't do," she muttered. "Not at all." Sam felt a flicker of frustration rise within him. He didn't want to argue, but it was becoming clear that Linda wasn't going to stop. He took a steady breath and said firmly, "Please step back. You're on my property." But Linda ignored his words. Instead, she pointed toward the backyard again. "If you really want to be part of this community, you should be willing to make small sacrifices. My event will only last a few hours. Why can't you be reasonable?" Her words carried a strange mix of authority and persuasion, but to Sam, they still sounded unfair. Why should he cancel his evening when he had done nothing wrong? Why should his peace be disturbed for someone else's party? He decided not to argue further. Instead, he said simply, "I'm sorry, Linda. My plans are set. I can't change them." Linda's eyes narrowed once more. "You'll regret this," she said, her tone cold. "People don't usually refuse me. You should think carefully about what kind of neighbor you want to be." With that, she turned sharply and walked away, her shoes clicking against the pavement. Sam stood in the doorway for a long moment, feeling both unsettled and determined. As the evening sun dipped lower, his phone buzzed. A message from his friend popped up, "On the way. Can't wait to see the new place." Sam smiled faintly. He would not let one person ruin his evening. Still, he had a feeling this wasn't the last time he would hear from Linda. Something about the way she had spoken so certain, so controlling told him the real conflict was only beginning. And as he looked out at the calm street, with neighbors quietly going about their routines, Sam wondered if they had ever faced the same pressure. Did they all simply give in to Linda? Or had anyone else dared to stand their ground? The thought lingered in his mind, heavier with each passing minute. The evening grew cooler as the sun slipped lower behind the tall trees. Sam lit a small candle on the table in his backyard, hoping the soft glow would add to the calm atmosphere. Soon his friends would arrive, and he wanted everything to feel warm and welcoming. But even as he arranged the food and drinks, his thoughts kept drifting back to Linda's sharp words. He tried to shake them off, but the way she had stood on his lawn and declared her authority unsettled him. He wondered if the other neighbors had dealt with the same kind of demands. Maybe that was why most of them kept their distance. Just as Sam was setting out a plate of fruit, he noticed movement from the corner of his eye. Across the street, curtains shifted. A man stepped out onto his porch, holding a newspaper, though his eyes were not on the print. They were on Sam. Sam gave a polite wave. The man hesitated, then raised his hand in return, almost as if he wanted to say something but wasn't sure if he should. A few minutes later, another neighbor walked past with her dog. She slowed down near Sam's fence, giving him a sympathetic smile before quickly moving along. It was a small gesture, but it made Sam realize something: people were watching. They had seen or at least heard parts of his exchange with Linda. The thought made him uneasy, though it also gave him a strange sense of strength. If others knew what had happened, then maybe he wasn't alone in this. Moments later, Sam heard footsteps on his driveway. He turned to see Linda again, this time without the clipboard but with her arms crossed tightly. Her expression was even sharper than before. "I told you," she said firmly, "you need to take this down. My guests will be arriving soon, and your setup is in their line of sight." Sam placed the plate of fruit gently on the table and faced her. Linda, I've explained this already. I'm not disturbing anyone. This is my yard, and I have every right to enjoy it. Please, I don't want any trouble. Linda shook her head as if she were scolding a child. You think you can ignore me? That's not how this community works. People here respect authority. They respect me. You are making a mistake. Her voice was raised now, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Sam saw the man with the newspaper lower it completely, pretending to read but clearly listening. Another family across the street stood on their porch, watching quietly. Sam felt his heart beat faster. He didn't want a scene, but Linda seemed determined to create one. He kept his tone calm. I respect the community, but respect goes both ways. I have my own plans, and they don't interfere with yours. Linda's face turned red. She took a step closer, pointing toward the backyard as though marking it with invisible lines. Do you even understand who you're speaking to? I organize the events. I handle the fees. I make sure this neighborhood is kept in order. Without me, none of this would function the way it does. Sam met her eyes steadily. That may be true. But this is still my home. And my backyard is not part of your event. There was a long pause. The air felt heavy. For a moment, even the birds seemed to fall silent. Then Linda's voice cut through the stillness. If you don't clear this space, I will have no choice but to report you to the board. And when the board hears that you are unwilling to cooperate, don't expect them to be kind. Sam wanted to laugh at the idea of being reported for sitting in his own yard, but he held back. Instead, he replied softly, if you think that's necessary, do what you feel is right. I know I've done nothing wrong. Linda's eyes narrowed. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the sound of a car pulling up caught their attention. A silver sedan parked along the street, and two of Sam's friends stepped out, smiling and waving as they carried bags of food. Sam felt relief wash over him. Their cheerful presence broke the tension like sunlight cutting through dark clouds. He waved back, walking quickly to greet them. Linda, however, looked furious. She muttered something under her breath, then turned on her heel and walked quickly back toward her house. Her shoulders were stiff, and her steps sharp. As Sam welcomed his friends and helped them carry food inside, he noticed more curtains shifting and more eyes watching. It seemed the entire street had witnessed the clash. Later, as his friends settled in and they began to eat, Sam tried to push the incident from his mind. But he couldn't forget the way Linda had spoken, nor the anger in her eyes when his friends arrived. Something told him she wasn't finished. And though the night was filled with laughter and good company, deep down, Sam knew the real storm was still building. The soft hum of conversation filled Sam's backyard as his two friends enjoyed their meal. The string lights glowed warmly above them, and for a while, it felt like a normal evening. They laughed, shared stories, and admired the cozy setup Sam had created. For a moment, he almost forgot about the earlier tension. But just as the laughter grew louder, a sharp voice pierced the calm air. So you decided not to listen. Sam froze. His friends looked up in confusion. Standing at the edge of his yard, near the gate, was Linda. Her arms were crossed, her expression hard. Even in the dim light, her presence felt heavy. Sam sighed and stood up. Linda, please, he said softly, trying not to let his frustration show in front of his guests. We're just having dinner. Nothing more. Linda stepped forward without hesitation. Her shoes clicked against the stones as she walked right into the yard, uninvited. Sam's friends exchanged glances, clearly surprised at how bold she was being. "You think this is acceptable?" Linda said, her voice rising. "Do you know how embarrassing it is for me to have my guests see this display from their seats on my deck? They came here expecting elegance, and now they're staring at your picnic lights and folding chairs." Sam's jaw tightened. "This is not your property," he replied firmly. "You can't just walk in and demand I change my evening. I've done nothing wrong." But Linda didn't stop. She marched closer to the table, pointing at the plates and lights as though they were a crime. "You're disrespecting me and the entire association. If you cared about this neighborhood, you would have taken everything down the moment I asked." Sam's friends shifted uncomfortably. One of them whispered, "Is she serious?" But Sam kept his focus on Linda. He took a deep breath and said, "Please leave my yard. You're not invited here." The words seemed to shock her, as though no one had spoken to her that way before. Her face grew redder, but instead of leaving, she planted her feet even more firmly on the ground. "You can't tell me what to do," she snapped. "I am the president of the association. This whole neighborhood respects me." Sam felt a wave of frustration rise, but he reminded himself to stay calm. He didn't want to match her anger. He wanted to stand his ground without losing his composure. "Linda," he said evenly, "being president doesn't give you the right to enter someone's property without permission. Please, step back." By now, neighbors had started to notice again. A few people leaned on their fences, and some stood quietly on their porches. The street lights flickered on, casting a pale glow across the scene. The whole neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Linda, however, acted as though the attention only fueled her. She raised her voice even more. "You see? This is what happens when people don't listen. He doesn't care about this community. He doesn't care about presentation. He's making everything look cheap, and now all of you have to witness it." The neighbors stayed silent, but Sam could feel their eyes on him. He clenched his fists for a moment, then relaxed them. "Linda," he said, his tone firm but calm, "this has gone far enough. Please leave my property. If you don't, I'll have to call someone for help." Her eyebrows shot up. "Are you threatening me?" she demanded. "No," Sam said quietly, "I'm asking you to respect boundaries." There was a tense silence. The air felt thick, almost heavy. Then, without another word, Linda turned sharply and stormed out of the yard, her steps loud and fast. She didn't look back, but her voice carried as she muttered, "You'll regret this." Sam's friends let out a sigh of relief once she was gone. One of them shook his head. "Wow. I've never seen anything like that. She really just walked in here like she owned the place." Sam sat back down, his shoulders heavy with stress. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She thinks she does." Though the evening continued and his friends did their best to lighten the mood, the tension lingered like a shadow. Sam couldn't stop replaying the moment in his mind, Linda stepping into his yard, pointing at his decorations, declaring her authority. It wasn't just about tonight anymore. It was about respect, about the right to enjoy his own home without interference. And judging by the look in her eyes when she left, Sam knew Linda wasn't finished. As the night ended and his friends drove away, Sam stood alone in the backyard. The string lights still glowed gently, but the warmth of them felt dimmer somehow. He looked toward Linda's house across the street. Most of her guests were gone, but he could still see her standing on her deck, arms crossed, staring in his direction. The sight sent a chill through him. This wasn't over. The next morning, Sam woke up to the sound of birds outside his window. For a moment, he lay still, enjoying the quiet. But the peace did not last. Memories of the night before came rushing back. Linda stepping into his backyard, raising her voice, declaring her authority, and leaving with the promise that he would regret this. Sam sat up in bed, rubbing his forehead. He had moved to this neighborhood for peace, not conflict. Yet here he was, caught in a problem that seemed to grow bigger with every passing hour. When he walked outside to pick up his mail, he noticed something unusual. A few neighbors were out early, watering their lawns or walking their dogs. Normally, they might wave or smile, but today, they only gave him quick glances before looking away. It was subtle, but Sam could sense the weight of curiosity. Word about his disagreement with Linda must have spread. He didn't blame them for being cautious. Linda seemed like the type of person who expected everyone to follow her. If someone stood against her, maybe the others worried they would be the next target. Later in the afternoon, as Sam was cleaning up his yard, he saw Linda again. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching him. Her eyes followed his every move, sharp and unblinking. At first, Sam ignored her. But then, without warning, she marched across the street. Her steps were steady, her face set in determination. "Still not cleared," she said the moment she reached his yard. Sam took a slow breath. "Linda, we've talked about this. I'm not moving anything. I'm not breaking any rules." She shook her head. "You think rules are the only thing that matter? Respect matters more. And right now, you're showing none." Sam stayed calm. "I respect everyone here. But I also respect myself, and that means standing up when something isn't fair." Linda's expression hardened. She stepped closer to the yard again, just like before. Her voice grew louder. "If you refuse to cooperate, then I'll have no choice but to take action. I can call a meeting. I can bring the board. People will see you're not the kind of neighbor who belongs here." The words stung, not because Sam believed them, but because they carried the weight of a threat. His heart raced. He thought about the neighbors watching from behind their curtains, about his quiet plans for a peaceful life here, and about the unfairness of the situation. This time, he realized, he couldn't just ignore it. Taking a deep breath, Sam pulled his phone from his pocket. "Linda," he said firmly, "you're on my property again without permission. I've asked you to stop. I don't want this to continue. If you refuse to leave, I'll have to call the authorities." For the first time, Linda's eyes widened. "Authorities," she repeated, almost as if the word itself shocked her. Then she laughed bitterly. "Do you really think they'll take your side over mine? I'm the president. I've been here for years. You're just new. They'll listen to me." But Sam did not put his phone away. He unlocked the screen and began dialing. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice stayed steady. "Then let them decide," he said quietly. The sound of his fingers pressing the button seemed louder than the chirping birds around them. Linda froze, her confident smile flickering for just a second. "You wouldn't," she said, though her voice was less certain now. Sam met her eyes. "I would. Because this isn't right." The silence that followed was heavy. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, curious about the scene unfolding in broad daylight. The street felt unusually quiet, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Sam pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, then connected. He explained the situation clearly to the non-emergency line. His neighbor had entered his property repeatedly without permission, demanded he leave his own yard, and refused to stop. The dispatcher assured him an officer would be sent shortly. When Sam hung up, Linda's face had gone pale. She crossed her arms again, but this time the gesture looked more defensive than powerful. "You're making a big mistake," she muttered. "You'll regret this when people see you as the troublemaker." Sam shook his head calmly. The only mistake would be staying silent. Linda stood there for another moment, her eyes darting between Sam and the street. Finally, she turned and walked quickly back toward her porch, her steps faster than usual. Sam's chest felt heavy, but at the same time, lighter than it had in days. He had finally taken a stand. Within half an hour, the sound of a car engine grew near. A patrol car pulled up to the curb, and an officer stepped out. The neighbors, who had been quietly observing, leaned a little closer now. The moment everyone had been waiting for had arrived. Sam straightened his shoulders and prepared himself. The situation was about to take a serious turn. The sound of the patrol car's engine echoed softly down the quiet street. Sam watched from his porch as the car came to a slow stop in front of his house. The street, which had been filled with quiet tension for days, seemed to hold its breath. A few neighbors peeked out of their windows and doors, curious but careful not to interfere. The officer stepped out, tall and confident, with a calm expression that immediately made Sam feel a little less anxious. He walked up the driveway with a measured pace, giving Sam a small nod. "Good afternoon, sir," Sam greeted. "Thank you for coming." "Afternoon," the officer replied politely. "I understand there's a situation here involving a neighbor dispute. Can you tell me what happened?" Sam took a deep breath, steadying his voice. "Yes, officer. My neighbor, the HOA president, Linda, has repeatedly come onto my property without permission. She's demanded that I remove decorations and clear my backyard because she is hosting a party. I've tried to explain that I'm not interfering with her event, but she refuses to leave. It has happened multiple times, and I feel uncomfortable having her on my property." The officer listened carefully, nodding as Sam spoke. "I see," he said. "Did she threaten you or make any physical contact?" "No, officer," Sam said firmly. "She hasn't touched me. But she has pointed at my belongings, raised her voice, and refused to leave when I asked. I want to make sure this doesn't escalate further." At that moment, Linda appeared on her porch, crossing her arms with a scowl. She spoke loudly, enough for the officer to hear. "He's exaggerating. I'm just trying to protect the neighborhood. My guests deserve the best view. He refuses to respect the community." The officer turned his gaze toward her. "Ma'am, can you step down here so we can discuss this calmly?" Linda hesitated for a second, clearly annoyed, but then she walked toward the yard, stopping a few feet away from Sam. Her voice was sharp. "I have every right to speak to him. I'm the HOA president. I handle all events and rules in this neighborhood." The officer held up a hand politely. "I understand your role, ma'am. But property boundaries and personal rights still apply. You cannot enter someone else's property without permission, even if you hold a position in the HOA." Linda's face paled slightly, but she quickly tried to regain her confident posture. "I was only asking him to cooperate. I didn't mean any harm." Sam shook his head slightly. "Officer, she has come onto my yard multiple times, insisting I remove my things, and refused to listen when I asked her to leave. I haven't threatened her or broken any rules. I just want her to respect my property. The officer nodded and looked carefully at both of them. I see. Ma'am, you have the right to voice concerns to the HOA or report issues officially, but you cannot physically enter someone else's property or demand changes without consent. That includes taking down decorations or furniture on a resident's private property. Linda's hands trembled slightly as she crossed her arms tighter. But, the view. My guests. Ma'am, the officer said calmly, a private party cannot override another person's property rights. You've already been asked to leave. If you remain on the property against Sam's wishes, I would have to take action to enforce his rights. Linda's shoulders slumped, though her pride still burned visibly. She muttered under her breath and slowly stepped back toward her porch. This isn't over, she said quietly. The officer turned to Sam. Are you comfortable if I make it clear that your property is private and she cannot enter without permission? Yes, officer. That would be helpful, Sam said, relief flooding him. The officer walked a short distance to the boundary of Sam's yard and spoke clearly, so both Sam and Linda could hear, Ma'am, your presence here is not authorized. You must step off this property immediately. If you enter again without permission, legal action could be taken. This is a warning to protect the residents' rights and avoid escalation. Linda glared for a moment but did not argue further. She muttered something under her breath, turned, and walked back to her house. Sam watched as she disappeared inside, her scowl still visible through the window. The officer then turned back to Sam. You've done the right thing by staying calm and reporting the issue. You have every right to enjoy your property without interference. If she returns, you can call us again, and further action may be necessary. But for now, your rights are protected. Sam nodded, feeling a wave of relief he hadn't felt in days. The tension that had gripped him finally seemed to ease. Thank you, officer. I really appreciate your help. You're welcome, the officer said with a small smile. It's important to resolve disputes like this calmly. Often, people overstep when they feel their authority isn't respected. You handled it well by staying composed. As the officer returned to his car and drove away, Sam exhaled deeply. The street returned to its quiet rhythm, but now it felt lighter. The neighbors peeking from their windows gave small nods and smiles, some even waving gently as they returned inside. Sam walked back into his backyard, looking at his decorations, the string lights, the neatly arranged chairs, the little table full of food. Everything was just as he had left it, calm and peaceful. For the first time in days, he felt safe in his own home. Linda had been stopped, his rights were clear, and the neighborhood finally seemed like the peaceful place he had hoped for when he moved in. Still, he knew one thing, this wasn't the end of the story. Linda's pride and determination were strong, and she might try again. But for now, Sam allowed himself a small smile. He had stood his ground, and justice had quietly followed. He stepped onto the porch, took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, felt a sense of relief wash over him. The next morning, Sam stepped out into his backyard and took a deep breath. The air was fresh, filled with the soft scent of grass and flowers. The sun was beginning to climb higher, casting a warm glow over the string lights he had left hanging. For the first time in days, the yard felt entirely his. The events of the past week had weighed heavily on him. Linda's demands, her sharp words, and her repeated visits had left him tense, uncertain, and sometimes frustrated. Yet standing there, In the calm morning light, he realized something important: he had handled the situation with patience and firmness. His phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor, Mrs. Patel, who lived a few houses down. "Saw everything yesterday. You handled that so well. Proud of you." Sam smiled. It was a small note, but it reminded him that his actions mattered not just to himself, but to those around him. He had stood up for his rights without losing his composure, and some people had noticed. Later that morning, Sam's friends arrived again, wanting to help him tidy the yard. They carried boxes and cushions, rearranged chairs, and even added a few potted plants to make the space feel more welcoming. The laughter returned, light and easy, breaking the tension that had hung over the neighborhood for days. As they worked, Sam noticed something remarkable. Some neighbors stepped outside to water plants or sweep porches. A few even stopped to offer a friendly wave. It was subtle, but it felt different. Instead of avoiding him or peeking nervously, people were smiling and nodding openly. Perhaps they had learned that standing calmly for what was right could command respect. By mid-afternoon, the yard was spotless. Sam sat on one of the chairs, sipping a cold drink, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. He reflected on the past week. The confrontation with Linda had been uncomfortable, even stressful, but it had taught him a lesson he wouldn't forget. Sometimes, standing up for yourself doesn't require shouting or anger. It requires calm, patience, and knowing your rights. That lesson now felt more important than any decoration or backyard party. He glanced toward Linda's house across the street. She was outside, tending to her own garden, but she kept her distance. The scowl that had once seemed permanent on her face had softened slightly, though he knew her pride would not easily fade. He wasn't sure if she had learned anything from the situation, but that no longer mattered. What mattered was his peace and his right to enjoy his home. Later, as the sun began to lower toward the horizon, Sam invited his friends back for a small evening gathering. The string lights glowed warmly once again, casting soft shadows over the carefully arranged chairs and table. Laughter and conversation filled the backyard, simple and joyful. For the first time in days, Sam felt completely at ease. He watched his friends laughing and joking, sharing food and stories, and he realized how powerful it was to protect something as simple as peace and comfort in your own home. As the night grew darker, he looked up at the stars beginning to twinkle in the clear sky. The world felt quiet, safe, and steady. No longer did he feel the tension of Linda's demands pressing down on him. His backyard was his space, and tonight it belonged entirely to him and his friends. The next morning, Sam received a friendly knock at the door. It was another neighbor, Mr. Green, who had watched the events unfold over the week. "I just wanted to say, you handled that situation very well," he said, smiling. "It can't have been easy, but you stayed calm and firm. That takes courage." Sam nodded humbly. "Thank you. It wasn't easy, but I had to do what felt right. I wanted to enjoy my home without conflict." Mr. Green smiled again and walked away, leaving Sam feeling a quiet pride. It wasn't the kind of pride that came from showing power or winning arguments. It was the pride that came from standing true to himself and respecting others at the same time. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Linda remained HOA president, attending meetings and hosting occasional events, but she no longer approached Sam's yard. The small victory had set a boundary, and even her pride seemed to recognize it. Sam continued to enjoy his backyard. He added more lights, a few more plants, and even a small fountain that created gentle, soothing sounds. Friends came over often, neighbors waved, and for the first time, he felt a real sense of belonging, not just because he owned a home, but because he had earned respect through his actions. As he sat one evening, watching the string lights flicker softly and listening to the faint hum of the neighborhood settling into night, he reflected on the journey. Conflict had appeared unexpectedly, threatening the peace he had longed for. But by staying calm, standing firm, and knowing his rights, he had not only protected his home but also discovered the strength within himself. Sam smiled quietly to himself. Life would always bring challenges, he knew, and not everyone would agree with him. But he also knew this: courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet, steady, and full of patience. And tonight, as the lights glowed softly and the stars shone above, Sam finally felt the calm and joy he had moved here to find. The backyard was his. The peace was his. And he knew, no matter what came next, he could face it with patience, courage, and quiet strength.